Good afternoon, everybody who has been able to join us thus far. We will get ready to go here in just about 30 seconds as people join. We thank you for joining this webinar today. We're going to go through about a 30 to 35-minute presentation and then have time for Q&A at the end. So we'll get going in just about 30 seconds. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today to learn more about the Reimagine Metro Transit Service Plan. My name is Valerie Shea, and I am the Director of Planning and Strategic Development here at Metro. So today, what we're going to present to you is our draft Reimagined bus network. So this draft network, it really builds upon the vision that we set forth with our strategic plan that we adopted back in November of 2020. And that strategic plan set a goal to rebrand Metro as a regional mobility provider. And to do that by really reimagining our fixed route and our demand response services, and then looking for some creative new mobility options and partnerships along the way as well. But today we're going to focus exclusively on the fixed route network, which serves really as the foundation for all of our other services. There will be additional opportunities for feedback on our demand response services like SCAT and ADA in another outreach period that will occur in the beginning of 2022. But today we're going to talk about fixed route. And again, so what you'll see today is just a first draft, and we are in the early stages of this process. So now is really the time to provide your feedback. You'll receive information at the end of the webinar on exactly how to do that and the best ways to submit your thoughts. During the webinar, we'll be using the Q&A session or function to ask questions. So on your screen, you should see the option at the bottom of your screen for Q&A. We'll go through the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, we will be taking questions through that Q&A module. We encourage you to use that instead of the chat box, so please use that Q&A function. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to our consultant team at Jarrett Walker and Associates to lead our presentation. We have both Evan Landman, our project manager, and Jarrett Walker here with us today. They are transit planning experts who complete this type of work all throughout the country, and we are very glad and lucky to have them working with us on this exciting project. So with that, I am going to toss it over to Jarrett, and he will lead us through the presentation. Take it away, Jarrett.
Thanks very much, Valerie. Really excited to be here. Thanks for coming. Appreciate your interest in the opportunity to rethink your transit system. Quickly about who we are. We're a little firm that just does this kind of project. We go around the country and the world helping cities think about this particular problem, how to redesign a bus network. So our work here is about integrating your expertise in your city with our expertise in how bus network designs tend to work. And that'll lead us to asking you some particular important questions. Now, Valerie reviewed this, the three main components of your Reimagine Metro effort. This in particular is about redesigning the bus route services, the first of the three components. Now, I want to introduce a really basic idea that's at the foundation of everything we're doing. And that is that it's a good thing if people can go more places so they can do more things. And that's what we're going to be trying to measure throughout this project. So here's a person. She's in a city full of possible destinations, places she could go, things she could do. The transit system, the way the transit system is, there's an area she can get to in 45 minutes. And her access to destinations is the number of destinations that are in that area. So we can count a person's access to jobs or schools or shopping or whatever else. And the point of this then is that we can show this not just, so we can show everyone kind of what their access to opportunity is and how that might change in response to a network plan. So this is one example of such an image, randomly selected location, Howard and Euler in Akron. And you see these blobs that show you where someone from there could get to in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or 60 minutes on the transit system. And then down here, we can calculate how many jobs that is. And of course, you could calculate how many other useful things that is. What we're trying to get at is just, if you rely on the transit system, where is the wall around your life? How can you, where can you get to, which governs, of course, what you can do in your life. So when the next thing we do is for each point in the city, like this one, we calculate this number, how many jobs people can get to in a fixed amount of time. And that gives us this starfish shape, right? You have a few major corridors, Arlington in the south, Canton Road, West Market, and so on, where you have most of the job access, because that's where most of your frequent service is. We want to expand that if possible. We want more people to have access, to be able to get to more things. Here's the interesting thing. When we just focus on improving where people can get to, we improve a whole bunch of other things too. By expanding access, we're making transit more useful to more people, which improves its potential to attract more riders. From that come the congestion benefits, the emission benefits of transit, and also fare revenue, more money from the fare box so that the transit agency can afford to do more things. But access also means, we're talking about access to opportunity, which is a good thing in itself. It's related to the support for full employment, because the primary reason people don't hold jobs, especially low-income people don't hold jobs, is that they can't get to them. Transportation is the primary barrier. So as we expand the access that the transit system provides, we are literally helping the move toward full employment. And finally, personal freedom. Where you can go is limited. What you can do in your life is limited by where you can go. And so when we expand people's access, we're expanding their freedom. Now, you've already been through a strategic plan process that gave us this general direction: focus fixed route services on the highest ridership corridors and on serving markets where and for whom transit is essential. And we're going to talk in a moment about how the plan delivers on that, but also what that means in practice. So here's the difficult thing. What the transit system should look like depends on what your goals are. And so it matters a lot. So we need to clarify what your goals are in order to know that we're designing a transit system that meets those goals. Now, you've already done a lot of this work in the strategic plan, but I do want to review the trade-off quickly to make sure everyone understands why this is difficult. So here's a simple fictional town where the dots represent people or jobs. So 70% of the population is on these two main streets, and everyone else is scattered here and there at low density. Okay, looks a lot like a lot of cities. And let's say I have 18 buses with which to serve this city. Well, if my goal were ridership, I would put all those buses on the two major streets and provide really good service to 70% of the population. And that would be the way to maximize ridership. And the reason for that is that ridership is so sensitive to frequency. And by putting my buses on fewer routes, it means they will come more often. And that is how transit becomes highly useful. To put it another way, that's how we make the blob of access really big for the 70% of people who live along these streets. That's how we get them to the most jobs, the most opportunities. Now, someone who lives in the southeast corner of the city doesn't like this idea. She pays taxes too. She may have lifeline needs too. This isn't serving her. That's right, it isn't serving her. This network is maximizing ridership. And it's doing that by maximizing access to opportunity for most people. But to do that, it can't go everywhere and serve everyone. So if the goal is to serve everyone, that would be a coverage goal. And with the coverage goal, we start by saying we need to run service near everyone who needs it. Now that produces a network more like this, where I've got buses to every corner of the city. And now I've got 10 routes instead of 2, which means I've spread my buses over all those routes, which means that none of these routes are coming very often. They may just be coming once an hour. And service once an hour is just not that useful because it's just not likely to be there when you need it. So as a result, ridership on this network is much lower because it's not useful to very many people because the bus is never coming when people need it. So the idea of the coverage goal is that you spread it out But of course, by spreading the service out, you're also spreading it thin. And that's the challenge. So the strategic plan, in Metro strategic plan, they already asked the public this question about the trade-offs between a coverage-oriented network and a highly frequency-oriented network. And the answer was almost 2/3 of respondents said they preferred the frequency-oriented network. So we're going forward with that. Now, though, you'll get to see what that really looks like, and you'll get to decide again if that's really what you meant. So let's think about the two goals this way. They both usefully serve different purposes. One is about the ridership goal increases access to opportunity on average and for most people, but not everyone. It achieves the highest fare revenue. It's supportive of dense and walkable growth because that tends to be where it goes anyway. By getting the highest ridership, it achieves the maximum emissions reduction, the maximum reduction of vehicles miles traveled. And if I were talking to a business-oriented person, I would say that this network thinks like a business. But the coverage goal is also tied to very important reasons that many people support public transit. Lifeline access for almost everyone. So ridership goal, good service for most people. Coverage goal, some service for everyone. That's the conflict. Political geography makes people like the coverage goal because it will tend to go to every member city, every council board, every political district in the county. And generally, many people would say it's thinking like a public service, being there for everyone the way the water district is. So to understand why this map looks this way. So first of all, the strategic plan told us to move to the left. You have a network that's very oriented toward coverage now. The strategic plan told us to move to the left toward a more ridership-oriented network. That means some service disappearing in places, but more frequency on major corridors. Your strategic plan didn't tell us how far to move in that direction. So now really we have that conversation, and we're going to present you with some illustrations that show one thing that could mean, and you can tell us what you think. But first of all, I need to explain why these two networks look like this. Why we get the highest ridership by concentrating frequency like that. And it has to do with the fact that the land use pattern, the development pattern in an area has an enormous impact on whether transit can provide access efficiently and therefore whether it can attract ridership efficiently. So here are 4 little pictures of that. Density is fundamental to efficient public transit. And so transit that's trying to serve a lot of people at a low cost will focus on high density areas. In these 2 images, the 2 bus routes cost the same to operate. They both have 2 buses on them, but the top one has twice as many people or jobs around every bus stop. So of course, that's twice as many people who will benefit from the service, whatever service we provide. That's why transit necessarily focuses on high density areas, especially if it wants ridership. We know the density patterns in your region. You know them too. We can talk about them more if you like. Walkability. Now, on the left here are 2 diagrams that have a dot in the center, which represents a bus stop. And the circle is a 1/4 mile from that bus stop. But the black is where it is places in the circle that where you could actually walk to the bus stop in a 1/4 mile. Now, as you see, if you have a connected urban street grid, almost everyone in the circle can walk to the bus stop in a 1/4 mile. But if you have a disconnected suburban style street grid with lots of gaps, or if you have, say, a freight rail line or a freeway running through here that blocks pedestrians from walking directly, then a much smaller part of the circle can actually walk to the stop. And that makes this, it's just as though it were less dense. It's just as though there were fewer people there. It makes it less of a ridership prospect, and therefore a ridership network is less likely to go there. Another important thing is that it has to be safe to cross the street at the stop, because you usually need the stops on both sides of the street for 2-way travel. So you think about some of your higher speed streets that you run buses on, that's one of the big barriers to making transit attractive is the danger of crossing those streets or the difficulty of crossing those streets. And so where you have good street crossings, that's also a better indicator that we can get high ridership because we know people can walk to the service in both directions. We know about walkability. And you probably know where it is too. We've done these analyses of where the walkability is highest, where you can walk to the most places directly. And as you would expect, it's not along the freeways. It's away from the freeways. It's away from the freight rail lines because those are barriers to walkability. It's in the complete connected urban grids like the inner South Side or like parts of Cuyahoga Falls, parts of the West Side, where we don't have those barriers. Those make those areas better public transit markets, places a high ridership network would logically go. Linearity, can transit run in reasonably straight lines? So these two fictional cities have the same four developments in them, but one of them is in one they're organized in a straight line, and in the other they're organized on cul-de-sacs of one kind or another. So when things are organized in a straight line along a single path, then we have an excellent transit market because I can connect any two of these places with the same transit line, and the line is as short as possible. If the bus has to deviate to go into things, then you have a weaker transit market because the route will be slower, which means passengers will like it less if they're riding through. And we won't be able to run it as frequently because the line is longer and therefore it takes more buses to operate. So this kind of development pattern you see in the bottom is fundamentally makes a ridership market. It makes it harder for a transit line to succeed. Proximity, finally, does transit have to cover long rural gaps? This is our challenge in the north part of the county where the distances are very large. And obviously transit will do better over short distances, although as you'll see, it's important to us to serve the long distances as well. We are aware of race and ethnicity. We are aware of the importance of conversations about racial equity and about compensation for historic racial injustices. We have been, when we identify the places that are predominantly Black in particular, it's interesting that most of them are actually potentially are potentially places that a high ridership network would go with good service because they are actually tending to be in a lot of the denser and more walkable areas, the inner South, the inner West in particular. We ought to be able to improve their experience quite a bit. Poverty, we know about poverty and we are watching it as we go. A higher ridership investment, a high ridership network that invests in low-income places is investing in low-income people by running more useful service near where they live. That's usually also the high ridership thing to do because lower-income people are more likely to ride. And so we know where poverty is, and we've looked at that closely. So draft Reimagine network. I'm going to show you, first of all, the countywide network, and then I'm going to show you the network zoomed in to the Akron area. So to understand these maps, you must understand the colors. So on all of these maps, a red line means a bus every 15 minutes. There aren't any on the existing network. A purple line means a bus about every 20 minutes. You have two of those already, West Market and Arlington. A dark blue line means a bus every 30 minutes or so. You have a few of those. A pale blue line generally means a bus about every 60 minutes. And orange, these pale brown lines mean service even less frequent than that, every 2 hours usually, or even worse than that. So here's the existing system. And here is the existing system, and here is the proposed draft network. I will go quickly back, forward, existing, proposed. So what you'll see is higher frequencies. You'll see on major corridors. You'll also see many 20-minute routes turned up to 15. We'll focus on that some more. But you will also see service disappearing in certain areas or being streamlined. Let's talk about the north side of the county a little bit. Northern end of the county up here on the east side is a whole bunch of buses that are almost never coming and that follow circuitous routes that go to a couple of places where a few people ride. They are not useful. They're unlikely to be coming when you need them, and they are not likely, and you're likely to find the route very frustrating because it's so circuitous. And many logical things are not really connected. Most obviously, there's no connection across to Cuyahoga County. although there are obviously a huge amount of traffic back and forth across the border. So the proposed network has replaced all of those squiggles with a pair of hourly lines, one of which generally stays close to Route 8, the other of which generally stays close to Route 91 through Twinsburg. They come out of Akron, stay together every 30 minutes through Cuyahoga Falls. Then they split, one route going north state and then staying close to Route 8 up to Macedonia, the other swinging over to Route 91 and covering Twinsburg. And then up here in Macedonia, they come back together. And so now again, you have a bus every 30 minutes through Macedonia, up past the casino, and all the way up to Southgate Transit Center in Southeast Cuyahoga County. This is very important because Twinsburg and Macedonia are much more oriented in the Cleveland direction than they are in the Akron direction. And there's so much need for people living in these areas to get to jobs in Cuyahoga County and for people in Cuyahoga County to get to the big job centers in Twinsburg. So we think there's a big improvement there. With that, let me zoom in on the inner city a little more. So here's the existing network in the inner city. And here is the proposed. And here is the proposed network. Existing, proposed, existing, proposed, existing, proposed. So what you see is 4 lines turning to every 15 minutes, not just West Marlton and Arlington, which are currently every 20, but also a new frequent line going down to the south, generally following Grant and then finally ending upon Brown down to Waterloo. You have a new frequent line in the inner west, which also serves the hospitals and the zoo. And you have a little bit of new frequent service here along East Exchange. You have more 30-minute service than you have now, before, after, but you have a little less coverage. So a good example, let's look at this inner south area right here. So you have a huge tangle of routes on top of each other here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 routes, more or less entangled, getting close to everyone, but getting close to everyone very infrequently, so that they're not likely to actually be coming when people need them. So in the proposed network, these routes are coming, there are 3.5 basically, but we have selected one to be the primary route. And running that one every 15 minutes. And the idea is to make that route worth walking to, so that more people can get access to a bus that's actually coming soon. And as a result, we no longer run it down. We would no longer be running down every street in this area the way we do now. So someone who lives, for example, at Brown and Archwood, well, no, there's no longer a bus going by their house, but a quarter of a mile away from their house, there's a bus that's actually coming every 15 minutes, likely to be coming when they need it, rather than just a bus that goes by their house that is almost never there when they need it. That's the trade-off. So when we look in general at connections beyond Summit County, the other thing I want to point out is the access to Kent. So if Kent and Akron were in the same county, there would probably be very frequent bus service in between them, because connecting 2 university towns is just about the highest ridership thing you can do in public transit. A collaboration with PARTA, which is the transit agency over there, will be needed in order to build up a good level of service. But for now, we're showing the network doing what it can with just Summit County's resources. And that is an hourly express bus this way up to Kent, and then also a local bus coming down through Independence Transit Center this way. Those are not enough service for the Kent to Akron market, but it's simply illustrating what we would recommend Summit County do with its own money as a starting point to what you really want to do, which is to put together a deal across the county line for both counties' agencies to be collaborating on good service there, because it's a high ridership market for both of them. So expansion and job access. Here's what it is on the countywide level. And now what these blobs are is that a particular zone is green if the access to opportunity improves, the access to jobs reachable in 45 minutes. If that improves, it's green. And if it's darker green, it improves by more. If it gets worse, it's brown. And if it gets worse by a lot, it's dark brown. As you can see, there's a whole lot more green than brown. Up here, by the way, there are a lot of improvements, but the 45-minute travel time doesn't catch them because the distances are simply too long. Most transit commutes up there will be 60 minutes just because of the distances. So as a result, you're not showing the benefits, but compared to what's there now, there are big benefits for Twinsburg and Macedonia in terms of access to jobs. So zooming in on the urban area for a minute. You've got huge improvements in access to jobs in the inner south, in the inner west, out the Cuyahoga Falls corridor. And you also have a general improvement over most of the city and certainly over most of the lower income parts of the city. There are inevitably always a couple of places that have a loss. One is going out Canton Road in the southeast. The other is some nooks and crannies out in the far west of Barberton along Norton Road. But for the most part, you see there's a general increase in access to opportunity over most of the city. So that's why we think this might be worth considering, even though changing people's bus routes will make a lot of people angry. So just to get a sense of how big this benefit is, these little charts show you in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or 60 minutes, how many jobs somebody can get to in the existing network or in the Reimagine network, the draft Reimagine network as we're presenting it now. So, and this is probably the 45 minutes is the most common travel time. Let's just look at that one. For all residents, everyone, on average, you can get to 63% more jobs in 45 minutes. But for the disadvantaged communities and for communities where we have concerns about equity or justice, the outcome is better. So lower income people can get to 98% more jobs. Black residents can get to 71% more jobs. All minority residents collectively get to 74% more jobs. So not only is there a consistent improvement for everyone, but there's also a disproportionate improvement for communities of equity concern, whether it's minority groups, people of color, or just low-income people. Overall, though, 63% overall increase in access to jobs. That simply means more people can get to more places and do more things using the public transit system. So there they are again, side by side, existing network, proposed network. And with that, I'm going to ask Evan to quickly discuss the next steps.
Thanks, Jared. So as Valerie mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is really just the first step in this process, focused on the first draft of the Reimagine network for the fixed route network only. So this is a year-long process, and you can see from this chart where we are right now in public engagement around this first draft. Based on what we hear during this period, over the winter in November and December, we'll be revising this initial draft into something a bit more concrete, which we'll bring back to the public at the beginning of 2022 for another round of feedback and input that'll help shape the final version of the plan that's worked into the transit development plan next spring. During the next phase, we'll also be developing a pair of financial scenarios that show what the network could look like with a little bit more resource to run bus service. So with 5% more funding for transit and with 10% more funding. And that allows us to create a picture that's a bit more aspirational in terms of here's what could be possible if there were a bit more funding available. During that time, we'll also start to think about any changes to the demand response programs, to SCAT Senior, and the ADA program that might be associated with changes to the fixed route network. But we haven't begun the process of thinking about those at all yet. And so that's something that will be an important subject in the next round of outreach at the beginning of 2022 as well. Jarrett, could you go to the next slide? So right now, we really want to hear what you have to think about this draft Reimagine network. We have a survey app that you can find at our website. That's reimagine-metro.com. That website has a much longer version of this presentation that describes in detail the changes that are included in the draft Reimagine network. It also has a list of events, open houses, and other in-person opportunities to come and talk with Metro staff about the draft Reimagine network. And most importantly, it has a link to our survey, which takes about 10 minutes and is really important for everyone to take so that we can hear in as much detail as we can what you think needs to change, and give us the direction we need to take into the revision in the next stage of this process.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation today. I am going to pop the link directly to the survey over in the chat box right now. And while I'm doing that, if you have any questions, again, use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we can answer them through that module. So we'll give you a second to digest all the great information that you just heard. We will also be posting a recording of this webinar on our website after the meeting is over today. So keep an eye out for that. Again, that's reimagine-metro.com. And as Evan said, there's a ton of great information in there, really even going into more detail than what we were able to discuss today. This kind of just gave the overview today, but thank you all for being here. It looks like we did have a question come through. So the question is, how does a business give feedback about their location being removed from a route? So yes, I would encourage everybody to fill out the survey. That's the best way to send feedback. If you have a specific question about your location, please feel free to reach out to me directly. You can send it to planning@akronmetro.org. I do want to note one thing on the fixed route network. So as I said at the beginning, the fixed route network will really serve as the foundation for our services moving forward. So what we're trying to do specifically in the North County, which is where there's a lot of those changes, is set a foundation of a core route with that increased frequency. We actually I don't know that we mentioned it today, but we actually have Saturday service on those routes going up to North County. So having that backbone of a higher frequency service that run more days of the week, to do that, we're not able to hit the front door of as many businesses as we were before. But what we'll be looking to do is there's lots of different ways to kind of make those first and last mile connections, whether it be potentially a van pool program or other types of partnerships that we could work with the employers in those areas on to try to get employees from that core, fixed route service that's coming every hour to the front door of the business. So we'll be looking for those opportunities and having specific conversations with businesses that are impacted as we move forward. So I would say keep an ear open in the next couple of months to have those specific conversations. But yeah, this is, again, first step. We'll be going through additional conversations and an additional outreach period in January. We'll start to layer on some of those other alternatives as well.
I'll also note that there is a contact page on the Reimagine-Metro website as well. And if you have a sort of specific comment or concern and don't want to take the survey, or you feel like it's not being addressed by the survey, you can also reach out to the project team directly via that contact page.
Yes, thank you, Evan. It's all available on the website. And let's see, I see that Jarrett is typing back an answer here on our second question regarding.
Sorry, no, I wasn't. I was anticipating. It's really the same question you just answered.
Yes. Yep.
But
ahead,
I can speak more to little tykes if you want. But
yep, that would be great. Why don't you do that?
And can everyone see that question? Who's calling in or who's joined as an attendee, or should we read it back?
Go ahead and read it back. I'm not sure that everybody can see it.
So the question is only considering bus riding time and not shift start times in 24/7. So the new Little Tykes route would require people to walk 30 minutes in bad weather from Joanne's to our site. Is this just trying to respond to Amazon? So what's going on here is, and I'll share my screen to make sure that we all know exactly what I'm looking at. We're talking about this right here. Little Tykes is here. It's about a 30-minute walk east off of the main Highway 91. And this is the sort of difficult situation that the network plan presents us with all over the place, where we can run an extremely circuitous and twisting route to get to all of those places that are not in a straight line. And by doing that, we'll run lots of route miles, which means we won't be able to run much frequency, which means the bus will not be coming when people need it, which is already the case. And would continue to be the case. Now, you mentioned the question about shift times. The public transit system has to run on a repeated pattern, which means it is never necessarily responsive to shift times. A particular public transit line is going to have a whole bunch of employers on it, and they're all going to have different shift times. And it's going to have its own pattern of needing to get to downtown Akron at a particular time to connect with other buses. And that's all we can do. You can't expect transit to be more responsive to shift times than that. What we can do is provide more frequency. And that's what the plan does, provides more frequency up here. But unfortunately, again, to provide more frequency, we also have to run straighter so that we're running fewer route miles. And that unfortunately means that people would have to walk over to this difficult location. Now, as Valerie mentioned, what normally happens in this situation, and transit agencies and industrial employers are dealing with this all over the country, is that it tends to work best for the transit agency to design a network that's useful to a large diversity of people and employers, and then to partner with those employers for whom that's not convenient on developing other alternatives, whether it's last mile alternatives or van pool alternatives, a range of other options. And so we do encourage that conversation to occur. But if the decision is that we have to go to every front door of every business that we go to now, then it's not going to be possible to offer this higher frequency or this continuity of service into Cuyahoga County, both of which seem to be very large scale needs that would benefit a lot of people. Does the questioner want to follow up on that more, or have I answered that question?
We'll give it a second to see. And I know, Terry, I know you're on the line with us today. I do know we have a meeting coming up here in a couple of weeks through the Elevate Greater Akron group with you. So we'll be joining that conversation as well, and we can talk more specifics then too. We'll just give everybody just a minute to answer any last questions that we have. Again, a reminder, we do encourage everybody that's able to join us today to please go check out the website and take that survey. That's our main way of collecting feedback. If you have your own networks of folks that you work with that you are able to send a quick email and share the survey link and the website link, we would also encourage you to do that. Like we said, this is a draft plan. We are early in the process. Now is really that time to provide your feedback so that we can take that into consideration and make adjustments moving forward. This is not something that's happening tomorrow. As Evan mentioned, we'll kind of have our final plan of what we intend to do come this spring of 2022. But then there'll of course be a long public education and training period before the service actually gets changed and implemented. That's probably not until the end of 2022 or early 2023 at the soonest. So we are early. This is the time. We really, thank you for being here today and hearing more about what we have planned. And we look forward to hearing all of your feedback via the survey, and hope that if you're able to join us for any of our live outreach events that we have remaining, that you can do that as well. The survey and the comment period for this first outreach period is open through the end of this month of October. So we've got a couple more weeks of outreach to conduct. So with that, I am not seeing any more questions in the question and answer box. So we will go ahead and wrap up today's webinar and presentation. Again, a big thank you to Jarrett and Evan for being here and for being our experts and helping us through this process. We really appreciate it, and thank you everybody who was able to call in. We look forward to seeing you soon, and have a great day.
Thanks so much everyone for attending. Bye.